Thank you everybody for being here with us. This is our first of 3 promotional events leading up to a virtual self-care summit that we are hosting September 14th through the 18th. We're going to have 15 to 20 presentations on all different topics of wellness and self-care. It's for the community. It's for you guys. We'd love for you to share those things. We'll be giving you more information about that at the very end of this call. But Kasey is one of our amazing providers in the Day 7 network. She is a spiritual director with us, and today she's going to be doing a presentation on resiliency for spiritual caregivers. So we're really glad that you all are here. Kasey, we're so thankful for you. And yeah, we can't wait to hear what you have for us. As I mentioned to you guys as you were coming on, your videos are off and your microphones are muted, but feel free to ask questions in the chat feature at the bottom of the screen. We're also gonna open up time for Q&A at the very end, where some of you can ask questions if you have them, and we can unmute you for that time period. We have Abby Buter, who works for Day 7. She's in the background. She's navigating the chat feature. She'll be kind of moderating questions and maybe posting some content here and there. So that's who Abby is. And then as Kasey is presenting, she'll be sharing her screen and we'll be all turning off of our videos so that we're not a distraction to you all as you're looking through the slides. So just want to let you know that when you see Kasey's name, that's on purpose. She just wants you to be able to focus on the content of the slides. So I think that's all the logistics of the webinar today. And Kasey, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Candace, and thank you, Abby. And Abby, as if you put questions in the chat throughout the slideshow, Abby's going to collect all those, and there may be some similar questions that she's going to filter all those, combine all those, and save those to the end. So welcome, everybody. I am so thrilled to be with you today. And I've been a spiritual director for 17 years. But before I was a spiritual director, I burned out as a youth pastor in Missouri. Now, that was a very painful time for me. It was painful physically and emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and relationally. It affected all areas of my life. But you know what? That time led me to the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, and it led me to a new calling as a spiritual director. And it gave me the desire to help leaders, to help all of those caring for the souls of others, to care for their own souls. So when the Seattle School offered their online Resilience for Spiritual Caregivers in May, I signed up, and I really appreciated the information. And so I got the slides from them, and I hope that you find the information helpful as well. And you know, some of you will already know what I'm going to share. But it may be, you know, especially during times of stress, during times of crises, it's easy to forget. So before I start the slideshow, just a few words for you. First, each of us are an expert on our own experiences. So my crisis, my stress and anxiety is not exactly like yours. And how I deal with stress and crisis and anxiety will look different as well. It's going to be unique to me, just as yours is unique to you. And your own training, your own discernment is paramount. So all of us have some kind of training, have some kind of learning in companioning people during times of desolation. But when we too are going through a time of desolation, that can add a weight when we're in the middle of it. And you might find yourself right there in the middle of desolation, in the middle of anxiety, in the middle of stress right now. So you might not have the bandwidth for everything that I'm going to share today, and that's okay. I want to invite you to use a kind of Lectio Divina, kind of divine reading and listening, that you can just listen for, or maybe it's something that you read on the screen, something that resonates with you, that jumps out to you. Maybe it's something that you have resistance toward, because a lot of times what we feel annoyance with or anger, what provokes anger, holds the key for us. So there may be just one thing out of this entire presentation that jumps out at you. And that's okay, because it can be kind of like acupuncture for the soul, that one little thing can change your whole being, can change their whole flow. So I'm going to share my screen and walk you through this. I tend to talk with my hands, so I knew that I needed to turn off my video so I wouldn't be a distraction. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to share this screen first. And then I'm going to stop my video. Now, I'm a big one when it comes to transition, that transitions can be so important that they, rather than rushing from one thing to the next, where each day is almost like checking off a to-do list, to allow ourselves a moment to simply pause, to create the space so that we can have a spirit of welcoming before going on with the material. So let's just take a moment and close our eyes and allow for maybe 3 or 4 slow, relaxed breaths. Allowing time for our brains to catch up to where our bodies are. To realize that all of us are connected by one breath, that we sit in front of many screens and may be separated by many miles. To breathe in the spirit of life, the breath of God. To become aware of how we come to this presentation this morning. Amen. So what is resilience? Well, first, this is a part of the series of Resilience and Crises from the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology's Resilient Leaders Project. Now, at the end, we're going to send you information about the school's certificate in resilient service and a community mapping worksheet. But this comes from an online series, a free online series that they're offering. And this particular one is Resilience for Spiritual Caregivers, that originated with Kate Ray Davis, who is the director of the Resilient Leaders Project. And so what is resilience? We may think it is coping, buckling down, having a firm, hard shell, and getting through. But both a walnut and egg, given enough pressure, they're going to crack. They're going to break open. Now, coping has a time and place. It helps us get through some hard things, but long-term, coping leaves us fragile or brittle. We may think resilience is the ability to bounce back like a ball. And while this offers an image of adapting and recovering to stress, it still falls short, because it assumes a posture of getting through something and returning to your original shape. But there are hard times that we know we cannot return to life as normal. We've crossed a threshold. We'll never be the same unless we fake it. So a new normal is needed. So what if we envision resilience as the ability to grow in meaningful ways in response to challenges or adversity? With this in mind, the image of muscle growth offers a deeper, more transformative understanding of the essence of resiliency. Because in its simplest terms, muscle growth happens when a muscle undergoes stress or resistance. It experiences muscle tears or micro tears. And the immune system then comes and fixes those tears, and the muscle becomes stronger. However, working out too hard or too often leads to injury. Now, the difference between injury and muscle growth is rest and nourishment. Any kind of adversity can lead to growth and meaning, which allows for increased capacity, a greater ability to pour out and into others for the flourishing of humanity. Another word for flourishing is thriving. So, not just surviving, but thriving. Again, in allowing for a healthy stress repair process, the muscle grows stronger with even greater capacity than before. So resilience is not just about getting through or bouncing back in spite of stress, but becoming stronger through stress, through crisis, through hard times. So what is the process? Well, they call it the 3 Ps, the 3 pieces, or the 3 Ps of resilience: people, practices, and purpose. You'll notice that place is underneath those words because we need to acknowledge that place is an underlying factor for each of those. Our place and our culture determines the type of people we have access to. Our place, our culture determines our ability to practice or what practices are available to us, and whether our purpose is supported or undermined. So ongoing tending to the 3 Ps is important, especially during a time of stress and anxiety. So first, we need to be aware of the effects of stress and anxiety in ourselves. So some of these that they have found to be very important when identifying stress and anxiety: sudden weight gain or loss, difficulty sleeping, difficulty concentrating, feeling overwhelmed, burdened, or overly responsible beyond your boundaries. So a red flag is when you hear yourself say, "I'm running on fumes, but at least I can still give something." Well, that should clue us into the need to say, I need to stop and pause and care for myself, that I may be able to care for others and have what is needed beyond this immediate moment. Because when we're overwhelmed, everything can feel urgent. I think everything can feel urgent even if we're not overwhelmed. But a constant state of urgency can make us forget about ourselves in unhealthy ways. So it's imperative when there's a crisis that we do what the airline attendants tell us, is put our mask on first. We can't help anyone if we're passed out. The same goes with masks and coronavirus right now. That how important it is to care about ourselves, because spiritual care providers who are burnt out cannot provide effective spiritual care. So a brief overview of the 3 essential Ps. People. These are personal and professional communities of supportive, healthy relationships. Practices. These are exercises for physical, emotional, spiritual, and mental fitness. And purpose. A cohesive narrative that makes meaning of life and work. The first P, people, is the most vital component. In fact, the folks at the Seattle School say the 3 Ps should read people, 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 then practices and purpose. And we can each recall the people or the communities that have helped us through particularly hard times. We might be calling upon them even now in this time of crises. Oftentimes I'll joke with my husband, Russ, that I can't stand people right now. You know, that too is a red flag. Maybe you find yourself in the same boat, but that is a red flag for needed self-care for time of solitude. But when we're healthy, we do know, and we even dedicate our lives to helping people form good relationships, to receive strength and encouragement from a collective identity like a church community or a small group or spiritual direction group or even an exercise group. So when speaking of people, it's not just the people who were gathering together as spiritual leaders, but who were being gathered by as equals. So look at the people in your life, starting with the personal people at home, family, housemates, and pets. I love that pets are included under people, but we all know people, and maybe we're one of these people that our pet gives us so much care and attention during a time of crises, that for some people, their pet is the safest person for them. And so pets are included in the people. Friends, ideally, friendships don't need that. These are friendships that you don't need to play any productive role with them. You can practice asking for help, resolving conflict, setting and maintaining boundaries. And then there are hired people to help you personally: a counselor, a spiritual director, a nutritionist, an acupuncturist. And so while you may be providing spiritual care to people, who is providing spiritual care for you? So if you have a pen or a pencil and a journal, just take a moment and write down a name or two under that personal category. We also have professional people as a category: mentors or wise companions. These are people with whom you naturally feel connected, who you resonate with, or who are safe. A sign of a good companion, a good mentor, is someone who is not shy about showing delight in you. And similarly, they're open about growth areas and conflicts. Now, partners and advocates are those internal to your organization, internal to your church. They understand the complexity of the context. They're trustworthy, and you can partner with them and they can partner with you to affect change. So contrary to what we may think, studies show that pastors and leaders who thrive are those who have advocates within their church, within their organization, rather than those who do not. So partners and advocates internal within your organization are important. And then allies. Allies are external to your organization. They may be external to your denomination, and they can offer you a perspective with some emotional distance. They don't have a lot invested in the system as it is, so that they can care for you. The little community mapping worksheet we'll send out later will help walk you through this more in depth to help you remember names of people, especially for times when you feel isolated as a leader, when you feel overwhelmed. It can help you remember who to connect with. After going through it myself, I remembered 3 very supportive, encouraging people that had completely slipped my mind. So I reached out to them. I communicated with a couple of them via email, and I had a physically distanced visit with the other. Both were and continue to be, both of the folks through email and the person who I met with continue to be a breath of fresh air for me. I tend to be a go it alone type of person during times of stress, so having that little community mapping worksheet was very helpful. Now, key ways to cultivate people. One is engage regularly. Increase social support while maintaining physical distance. Sometimes the term social distancing can lead us to believe that we need to distance ourselves socially, but we're social beings. We need people. Remember, people, people, people. And so we still need to pursue connection with others, but with wise physical distance. Another key way of cultivating people is to anticipate when you'll need more engagement. you may know that there's something coming up that you'll need more support. So instead of waiting into the time where you're vulnerable, go ahead and reach out to those people now. Set and maintain boundaries in cultivating people. For me, this looked like honestly evaluating the role of Facebook for me. Was it really cultivating people? Was it really cultivating connection? So what I did in the last week, my son said to me, after my 9-year-old said, after you post a photo of me with my newest art project, take Facebook off your phone. Now, I think he had ulterior motives of downloading a game on there, so freeing up space, but he made a good point. And so I felt like God was speaking through him at that time. And so I took Facebook off my phone, which is a way of setting and maintaining boundaries. And then also noticing, another way may be noticing when you are suffering screen fatigue. And so letting these people know that you need some space, or maybe it's a phone call or a distance visit. Resolving conflict, asking for help, and drawing on a collective connected sense of identity. Our second P, practices. Excuse me. Now, practices are interconnected with one another. It's overwhelming to have separate practices for your body, your mind, your emotions, your spirit, your relationships. Talk about feeling overwhelmed. So when does one become another? I was talking to a dear friend who is a Sister of Mercy, and she mentioned how her new practice, regular practice of yoga, has become part of her prayer time, as well as offering her strengthening. And so you don't have to do all of these practices. You can focus on just one. We can often fall back into black and white thinking patterns, and that may actually take us away from what these practices offer. So with practices, the way we approach the behavior or the practice can say more about how we're doing than the behavior itself. So taking a look at some of these physical, emotional, spiritual, mental fitness practices. Sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night, drinking more water, eating more fresh foods, moving, stretching, strengthening, cardio, regulating emotions, learning and experiencing flow, prayer and meditation, rhythms and rituals, especially in community. And again, just for instance, if I have a regular practice of prayer and meditation and I explore how is that interconnected? Well, the prayer and meditation certainly will help regulate emotions. They'll help me enter into the experience of flow, right? So there's overlap, there's interconnection with these practices. So this leads me to the importance of knowing the difference between self-comfort and self-care. Coping behaviors, they can be either, but a comforting behavior is usually short-term ways to soothe ourselves, often detrimental to our long-term well-being if it's overutilized. And it's often isolating, something we do by ourselves or in private, something that we might even try to hide from others. We might be embarrassed about, it could be. Whereas care practices support our long-term well-being, and they increase a sense of connection to ourselves, to others, and to God. So for an example, on a particularly stressful day, I decided to binge watch Netflix all day. So by the end of the day, I'd realized that while I'd found comfort in the stories of others rather than my own, it had not given me the deep care my body, soul, and emotions craved. So in other words, it was good for the day, but it wasn't something that could be a regular practice for me. I needed to return to care practices that I knew would help me long term. So key ways to cultivate those practices are maintaining existing routines. Well, since the time of quarantine, our family's bedtimes have been drastically thrown off. And we have noticed how the later we go to bed, the more it throws off everything else. Because again, everything is interconnected. So it can be just one thing like getting enough sleep, our bedtime, that just needs that shift and to return to what was existing prior to the stressor, the crises. Restart practices that have helped you through previous difficulties. So taking a look at your own life story. During a time of difficulty, what helped you? Maybe there was even some music that you listened to and found comfort, and so maybe you pull out that music again. So allowing your own story to speak. You might try something new. So it could be something specific to the time of quarantine and physical distancing. Perhaps it's trying to reduce your news intake, or setting aside a set amount of time each day for worrying and journaling, or creating a list of gratitudes. You might choose just one practice and explore its interconnections. We've mentioned this, but maybe you decide to start out your day with a glass of water and explore how does that glass of water speak to you spiritually? How does it help you physically and emotionally, to explore those interconnections. And then when we find that we're failing, if you will, if we find that we've decided that we want to go, and this is what's happening in my family, we've decided, yes, everyone needs to go to bed earlier. The kids need to go to bed earlier, then the adults need to go to bed earlier. And yet we find that we're having a hard time sticking with it. And so having curiosity and compassion with ourselves, with myself, rather than shaming myself or feeling guilt about it. So asking myself, why don't I do what I know is good for me? What is standing in the way of my family getting to bed earlier? Or why do I do what I know hurts me? So having curiosity and compassion rather than guilt and condemnation. And then include others. People will notice when your practices change, celebrating and offering curiosity. So letting others know what it is. In fact, I started to let others know what I was doing with Facebook because I wanted them to, I needed the encouragement to take it off my phone. And so allowing others and including others in your practices is very helpful. Now, what we experience as comfort and what we experience as care are part of our own experience, our own story, gifts, and interests. I find watching masterpiece theater and eating desserts to be very comforting. The former is something I discovered I liked on my own, and the latter is something that I grew up with because desserts were something my family of origin bonded around. So you can imagine what I did in the first months of quarantine. I sought comfort through baking with my kids and eating desserts, and yet we all know that constant desserts are not going to offer us long-term care, but in fact, they'll be detrimental to my body and mind. So instead, I needed to look at what are some of these self-care practices. And for me, they are writing poetry, conscious breathing, focusing on my exhale, centering prayer, juggling, like literally juggling. And so I'm sure yours are different than that. So what we choose for self-comfort, what we run to for coping, and what we choose for self-care are unique to us. And the last P, purpose. You'll notice it says, is essential ... Well, when it comes to purpose and meaning making, because we're all meaning making creatures, part of our desire as spiritual caregivers is for people to connect with God and that they might become their true selves and bring their true self's purpose to this world. So your purpose, you can call it your North Star. You'll spend your whole life journeying in that direction. And so sometimes in times of stress and anxiety, we need to be reminded of our North Star. So things that we can do are create a phrase and post it where we're going to see it, like on our bathroom mirror or on our computer. We might make ourselves something we can hold, something that will remind you why you do what you do. You know, I have a pearl I sculpted out of clay, and I call it my pearl of great price. And it has the Greek word Sophia on one side and its English translation wisdom on the other. And so sometimes I just need to hold that pearl when I'm feeling overwhelmed to remember, why is it that I'm doing what I'm doing? Also, focus on your circle of influence, your present circle of influence. Develop realistic, achievable goals and remind yourself of your agency. Remind yourself that you can bring and affect change. So, what is something that you can do about it? What can I do something about right now, especially when I'm overwhelmed? It can be a very small something, but what can I do something about? You know, right now there may be space to think about what I could be doing. If you find yourself not enjoying what you're doing right now, you might reimagine your possible selves. Although the caveat is to dream without making huge sweeping decisions, even delaying any big changes, big decisions during crisis. Even though, granted, even though the crisis may sharpen your clarity. And with purpose, post-adversarial growth is important. It's also called post-traumatic growth, not to be confused with PTSD. But post-adversarial growth is growth from difficult circumstances or mistakes. It's the kind of growth through trauma or through a time of adversarial times that impacts, it transforms our purpose. So it invites us to reevaluate life assumptions, to resolve internal conflicts. During the time, there is the invitation for making space for grief and lament. Now, psychotherapist Esther Perel, I liked how she calls lament the Yiddish word kvetching, and talks about how all through time, all cultures, that kvetching, this kind of lament or complaint, we see it in the Psalms, that it actually works to bring people together. So here we are back with the people. And so that's something that we can do alone, and with God, it's something that we can do with others that's healthy. Also, through post-adversarial growth, we're allowing God to redeem our story. We're invited to ask, how has God acted in the past with my story? Where did I experience something traumatic or make a mistake that I thought would be the end of me? And later on, I saw good come out of it. You know, here we have Romans 8:28 of all things working together for the good, that good coming out of all things, though all things are not good in and of themselves. But how in your story has, just like in mine, that my burnout that brought me so much shame and guilt actually led to a calling as a spiritual director, is something that was a much better fit and healthier for me. So how has God been about redeeming your story? And this gives us tragic optimism or hope. So what is the good that will happen? And you might narrate it. So for me right now, as a spiritual director during this time of COVID-19, my retreats have all been canceled or postponed, except for one that's going to be an online retreat in August on nighttime dreams. But all the other retreats have been canceled. And so it took me a while. I feel that loss. I feel it both as far as my purpose goes, but also a loss of income as well. And so as I sit with that in the past month, I realized that it opened up space for me to spend more time with my kids, and it helped me help my daughter find a new passion for fencing of all things. And so I've been taking her to fencing lessons and have seen a big jump in confidence and strength with her. So I can say, here is some tragic optimism in the midst of the circumstances. And so you might use a memory as well to help you have hope rather than spiral into despair. Again, looking back at your own life and letting it speak. Also, a little group of friends and myself were talking about 2020 as liminal space, that threshold of for transformation, that time between what was or has been and what is to be. And several of us are starting to read the Wanting Journal on liminal space. So even that shift to start thinking of this time as liminal space has helped. So purpose is essential and not enough on its own. So please don't keep going because of your purpose, especially when you're exhausted, burnout, isolated, lonely. Once more, spiritual caregivers are apt to do this. Various numbers on the Enneagram are apt to do this, and you know who you are. So again, revisit being aware of signs of stress and anxiety and the need to pause. And during crisis, if you have a hard time remembering, anything that I've said actually, or anything that you've seen, then return to your breath. It's been there since you were born, through all of your difficult times. And guess what? It connects you with all people. And so here we are back again to the connection with people. So now is a little time for reflection, allowing yourself a few moments. I'm going to read down through these, and then let's just allow for some time of journaling, and then we can move on to some questions or comments or observations. So who are 2 or 3 people in your life that you rely on and trust? And could you ask for more support or help to deepen those relationships? What are the practices you are currently engaged in to tend to your body, mind, and spirit? What practice are you most in need of adding? What part of yourself is least tended to? And I would also add that there may be something that needs to be subtracted, that needs to be taken away so that space is freed up. What are the experiences in your work that make it meaningful to you? What are ways that you feel you're making a difference? What parts of your work cause strain or conflict, and can you relieve yourself of those responsibilities or dynamics? And what has helped you through past difficulties? What helped your ancestors through hard times? And so you have a legacy from those who've gone before you, as well as being surrounded by your great cloud of witnesses. And I remember when they asked this question, this is one of the ones that I focused on in journaling. And what came to me instantaneously was what helped my ancestors through hard times, their sense of humor. And in that moment, I realized, because I resonate with an Enneagram 1, and in times when I'm in times of health, I go towards an Enneagram 7, where I'm much more spontaneous and playful. So in that moment, I was invited to introduce playfulness and humor. And so what helped your ancestors through hard times? So let's just take a few moments for some reflection and journaling. So I want to turn it over to Abby to help us see if there are any. I'm going to stop my screen share and you'll see here the Resilient Leaders Project right there. So that um, link will be sent to you. It may be in the notes. For the first time, they're offering this certification online.
I just posted the website for the Seattle School Certificate. Here, let me start my video. And just so if you guys see it there in the chat section, we didn't have any questions come through as you were talking, but if anyone has any questions or comments or things they'd like to share, go ahead and type those in the chat section.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If you have any observations or if you would even like to comment about what came to you, what stuck out to you, or what may have come to you as you looked at those reflection questions, you're welcome to share with us.
And I'm able to take anyone off of the attendee format. So if anyone, you could use the raise hand feature and I could make you where you're able to talk and share or ask any questions.
Absolutely. That was one of the things that stuck out to me during the time of the difference between self-comfort versus self-care. And for me, the idea that, yeah, as soon as they mentioned it to me, it was like a deep aha, yes, an immediate aha, deep resonating of, yes, there are things that I do to comfort myself, but they're only for the short term, that they're not offering me the long-term peace or whatever it is that I am needing at that moment, as opposed to these self-caring measures that that are sustainable long-term, that do impact all the other parts of our being, our physical being, and our emotional, mental, spiritual health. So I agree with you, Sarah, that the difference between self-comfort and self-care is huge.
I think
Yeah,
the distinction too that you made about just connecting and that too, and how self-comfort is often done in isolation. I think you said just,
mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with the difference in self-care and self-comfort, but you even kind of furthered that distinction for me. And that was really helpful.
Absolutely. To even say, how does this connect me? How is what I'm doing connect me to God, connect me to other people, connect me even to the other parts within my own life? So I might, like, for instance, with me binge watching Netflix, that might be helping me emotionally for a short time, but it's not helping me physically. It's not helping me spiritually or relationally, right? If I'm binge watching, I'm not hanging out with my family or friends or tending to those relationships. So it's affecting my connection both externally and internally.
Steve mentioned in here, I appreciate and believe that the term liminality is a helpful concept for us to think about when it comes to dealing with this unique time and the implications for self-care.
Absolutely. Yeah. Doesn't that offer that tragic optimism of this time of being liminal space with so much potential for transformation? Again, both internally and externally, both personally and communally. Absolutely, I agree with you. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Abby. So yes, once we're able to go back to monasteries and some of the convents, and I look forward to the time of facilitating retreats again in those places. But I invite all of you to join me for, and also spiritual director Scott Spradley is helping to facilitate that dream retreat in August. Oh, thank you. Yes, Latoya, same here. When I looked at what was I doing to try to cope, I noticed that I was doing a lot of self-comforting measures that much of what I was doing was self-comforting, that tends to be what we run to. Yeah. Yes, so both the entrance into liminal space and the exit out of liminality is, yeah, good point. Good point, yes. So 2 thresholds, absolutely.
Sarah, thanks so much for your comment. And I would love to share a couple upcoming things that we have, but I just want to make sure there's no other questions or comments before we kind of wrap up and share a few more exciting things. Kasey, did you have any other final thoughts for us that you'd like to close with? You got it all?
Again, I think that I'm glad that we recorded this and that we're going to make some of this shareable, as far as the mapping your community little worksheet that the Seattle School's offering, where it helps you walk through those personal, professional people. Because withdrawal, as we know, when we withdraw, it can add to our sense of loneliness. It can add to our sense of isolation. And so again, if you're like me, where a lot of times I've fallen into, I'll just do it myself, I'll just keep plowing through, that needs to be a red flag. And so allowing ourselves to sit down and to take the time to write out and to begin to realize the community that exists around us, because sometimes we think, oh, there's nobody who understands. Once we put pen to paper, you'll discover that you'll discover these trustworthy people. And then I'll also say this, is that as you do that exercise, you might discover that the people that you thought were advocates or allies or friends, that they're really not healthy advocates or allies or friends. And that too opens up that time for lament, for kvetching, for mourning, who you thought were your people, but then creating the space for God to bring to mind who is healthy, that can come alongside you. So again, I'm going to end with people, 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 as how important it is as spiritual caregivers that we have people who are pouring into and gathering us. So thank you so much. If you do have questions, if you're an internal processor like me, feel free to email me. I'm happy to have a conversation with you.
Well, thank you so much, Kasey. And thanks everyone who's joined us today. We're really, glad you're here and glad that this has been helpful. I know for me, one of the things that you said that really stood out was just remembering the practices that carried us through a past season. And I just think, it's all throughout the Old Testament where the Israelites were traveling and building stone monuments and remembering the things that God did for them. And then they would so quickly forget again. And I feel like that's me. And so that was a really great reminder to me to think through, okay, what are the practices that have carried me through, other difficult seasons? So yeah, this has been really helpful for me also. So just a couple announcements. I kind of hinted at the very beginning of this webinar about our virtual self-care summit. We are hosting a virtual self-care summit September 14th through the 18th. And we are going to have 15 to 20 presenters. I wrote down some of the topics to just give you all a little bit of a sneak peek, but topics are going to include creating a legacy, nutrition and intuitive eating, self-care for activism and social justice, mindfulness, the Enneagram, self-compassion, goal setting for the final quarter of the year, as we've kind of just forgotten all of our goals, leadership, finances, and the scarcity mindset, overcoming that, navigating change and the tsunami of change. And then we're even going to incorporate some fun into our self-care and bring on a comedian one evening. So we are very excited about all of those virtual workshops and webinars that y'all will be able to attend. We are selling tickets for these. Tickets are going to go on sale next week on July 17th. We'll launch our website for the event. and we'll launch the ticket sales. So you'll be able to buy individual tickets for sessions at $15, but we're also going to do a bulk package where you could get all 20 sessions for $147 discounted, significantly discounted, and we'll record all of the sessions. So we would encourage you to come to any of the sessions that really pique your interest, come to those live, but then you would be able to access all of the additional sessions on your own time. And then I know we have a couple organizations on this webinar, and so we're going to offer a nonprofit rate for nonprofit staff of 4 or more, and just cut it off at a max $500. And so, you know, you could bring as many of your staff to those and share all the resources with as many of your staff as you would like. We are going to do 2 more promotional events that are going to be free, just like Kasey's. And we would love for you to invite your friends to those so they can get a taste of what the presentations are going to be like at the Self-Care Summit in September. And the next one of those is July 29th. It's a Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. And our friend Dr. Stephen Bonner is going to present on anxious leadership. Regulating reactivity is not an option. So learning how to be interactive leaders rather than reactive ones. And I'm going to actually promote him to a panelist really quickly so he can just share 30 seconds to a minute about what y'all can expect for that. And then we will be emailing all of you guys a discount code for the Self-Care Summit because of your participation today. We'll send you the recording of this in case you want to rewatch it or send it to others. We'll send a community mapping worksheet that Kasey mentioned, and also some of the resources that she mentioned, along with the links to register for Steve's that he's about to tell about, and links to register for the summit. So I'm bringing Steve on real quick, and that'll be the end of today. So Steve, are you able to share? Hey, how's it going?
I am. I'm good. How are you?
Doing great. Dr. Stephen
Kasey,
Bonner.
well done. Well done. Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored to be with you guys, and look forward to being with you on the 29th. You know, it goes without saying that we're living in some very, very interesting times, right? And I like the language, a time of liminality, a time of in between, right? It's a time of high emotional anxiety. And we've all experienced, or perhaps we've even observed, anxious leaders in our families, in our work environments, and certainly in our state and federal government. Most argue that leadership is about action. I disagree with this. I really believe that leadership is about interaction. And what I mean by that is the ability to regulate one's reactivity when relating to others. So what I'd hope to do in this session is to identify the 6 common anxiety triggers that most produce reactions in us, and then learn how to engage them and then control them. So a little sneak peek about what I'm preparing for the 29th.
Thanks so much. That sounds awesome. So yeah, we'd encourage any of y'all to join. Abby just put the link for Steve's event in the chat, and we'll email that out to you as well. And again, invite your friends and start to share about the Self-Care Summit. We're really excited about it. Thanks for being here. Any other thoughts from you, Kasey, Abby, Steve? All right.
Thank you, day 7.
Y'all have a wonderful day. Thanks everybody for joining us.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.